at the prison door. Then a profound silence replaced the tumult that had so long been gathering, and a breathless pause ensued. Every window was now choked up with heads. The housetops teemed with people, clinging to chimneys, peering over gable ends, and holding on where the sudden loosening of any brick or stone would dash them down into the street. The church tower, the church roof, the churchyard, the prison leads, the very waterspouts and lamp-posts, every inch of room swarmed with human life. At the first stroke of 12 the prison bell began to toll. Then the roar, mingled now with cries of "Hats off!" and "Poor fellows!" and from some specks in the great concourse, with a shriek or groan, burst forth again. It was terrible to see. If anyone in that distraction of excitement could have seen, the world of eager eyes all strained upon the scaffold and the beam. The hollow murmuring was heard within the jail as plainly as without. The three were brought forth into the yard together as it resounded through the air. They knew its import well. "D'ye hear?" cried Hugh, undaunted by the sound. "They expect us. I heard them gathering when I woke in the night, and turned over on t'other side and fell asleep again. We shall see how they welcome the hangman, now that it comes home to him. Ha, ha, ha!" The ordinary, coming up at this moment, reproved him for his indecent mirth, and advised him to alter his demeanour. "And why, master?" said Hugh. "Can I do better than bear it easily? You bear it easily enough. Oh, never tell me," he cried, as the other would have spoken. "For all your sad look and your solemn air, you think little enough of it. They say you're the best maker of lobster salads in London. Ha, ha! I've heard that, you see, before now. Is it a good one this morning? Is your hand in? How does the breakfast look? I hope there's enough and to spare for all this hungry company that'll sit down to it when the sight's over." "I fear," observed the clergyman, shaking his head, "that you are incorrigible." "You're right I am," rejoined Hugh sternly. "Be no hypocrite, master. You make a merry-making of this every month. Let me be merry too. If you want a frightened fellow, there's one that'll suit you. Try your hand upon him." He pointed, as he spoke, to Dennis, who, with his legs trailing on the ground, was held between two men, and who trembled so that all his joints and limbs seemed racked by spasms. Turning from this wretched spectacle, he called to Barnaby, who stood apart. "What cheer, Barnaby? Don't be downcast, lad. Leave that to him." "Bless you!" cried Barnaby, stepping lightly towards him. "I'm not frightened, Hugh. I'm quite happy. I wouldn't desire to live now if they'd let me. Look at me. Am I afraid to die? Will they see me tremble?" Hugh gazed for a moment at his face, on which there was a strange unearthly smile, and at his eye, which sparkled brightly, and interposing between him and the ordinary, gruffly whispered to the latter, "I wouldn't say much to him, master, if I was you. He may spoil your appetite for breakfast, though you are used to it." He was the only one of the three who had washed or trimmed himself that morning. Neither of the others had done so, since their doom was pronounced. He still wore the broken peacock's feathers in his hat, and all his usual scraps of finery were carefully disposed about his person. His kindling eye, his firm step, his proud and resolute bearing might have graced some lofty act of heroism, some voluntary sacrifice, born of a noble cause and pure enthusiasm, rather than that felon's death. But all these things increased his guilt. They were mere assumptions. The law had declared it so, and so it must be. The good minister had been greatly shocked, not a quarter of an hour before, at his parting with Grip. For one in his condition to fondle a bird! The yard was filled with people, bluff, civic functionaries, officers of justice, soldiers, the curious in such matters, and guests who had been bidden as to a wedding. Hugh looked about him, nodded gloomily to some person in authority, who indicated with his hand in what direction he was to proceed, and clapping Barnaby on the shoulder, passed out with the gait of a lion. They entered a large room, so near to the scaffold that the voices of those who stood about it could be plainly heard, some beseeching the javelin men to take them out of the crowd, others crying to those behind to stand back, for they were pressed to death and suffocating for want of air. In the middle of this chamber, two smiths with hammers stood beside an anvil. He walked straight up to them, and set his foot upon it with a sound as though it had been struck by a heavy weapon. Then, with folded arms, he stood to have his irons knocked off, scowling haughtily round, as those who were present eyed him narrowly, and whispered to each other. It took so much time to drag Dennis in, that this ceremony was over with Hugh, and nearly over with Barnaby, before he appeared. He no sooner came into the place he knew so well, however, and among faces with which he was so familiar, Then he recovered strength and sense enough to clasp his hands and make a last appeal. "Gentlemen, good gentlemen!" cried the abject creature, grovelling down upon his knees, and actually prostrating himself upon the stone floor. "Governor, dear governor, honourable sheriffs, worthy gentlemen, have mercy upon a wretched man that has served his majesty and the law and Parliament for so many years, and don't let me die because of a mistake." "Dennis," said the governor of the jail, "you know what the course is, and that the order came with the rest. You know that we could do nothing even if we would." "All I ask, sir, all I want and beg is time to make it sure," cried the trembling wretch, looking wildly round for sympathy. "The king and government can't know it's me. I'm sure they can't know it's me, or they never would bring me to this dreadful slaughter-house. They know my name, but they don't know it's the same man. Stop my execution. For charity's sake, stop my execution, gentlemen, till they can be told that I've been hangman here nigh 30 year. Will no one go and tell them?" he implored, clenching his hands and glaring round and round and round again. "Will no charitable person go and tell them?" "Mr. Ackerman," said a gentleman who stood by after a moment's pause, "since it may possibly produce in this unhappy man a better frame of mind, even at this last minute, let me assure him that he was well known to have been the hangman when his sentence was considered." "But perhaps they think on that account that the punishment's not so great," cried the criminal, shuffling towards this speaker on his knees, and holding up his folded hands, "whereas it's worse 100 times to me than any man. Let them know that, sir. Let them know that. They've made it worse to me by giving me so much to do. Stop my execution till they know that." The governor beckoned with his hand, and the two men, who had supported him before, approached. He uttered a piercing cry. "Wait, wait, only a moment, only one moment more. Give me a last chance of reprieve. One of us three is to go to Bloomsbury Square. Let me be the one. It may come in that time. It's sure to come. In the Lord's name, let me be sent to Bloomsbury Square. Don't hang me here. It's murder." They took him to the anvil, but even then he could be heard above the clinking of the smiths' hammers and the hoarse raging of the crowd, crying that he knew of Hugh's birth, that his father was living and was a gentleman of influence and rank, that he had family secrets in his possession, that he could tell nothing unless they gave him time, but must die with them on his mind, and he continued to rave in this sort until his voice failed him, and he sank down a mere heap of clothes between the two attendants. It was at this moment that the clock struck the first stroke of 12, and the bell began to toll. The various officers, with the two sheriffs at their head, moved towards the door. All was ready when the last chime came upon the ear. They told Hugh this, and asked if he had anything to say. "To say?" he cried. "Not I. I'm ready. Yes," he added, as his eye fell upon Barnaby, "I have a word to say, too. Come hither, lad." There was for the moment something kind, and even tender, struggling in his fierce aspect as he wrung his poor companion by the hand. "I'll say this," he cried, looking firmly round, "that if I had 10 lives to lose, and the loss of each would give me 10 times the agony of the hardest death, I'd lay them all down, I would, though you gentlemen may not believe it, to save this one. This one," he added, wringing his hand again, "that will be lost through me." "Not through you," said the idiot, mildly. "Don't say that. You were not to blame. You have always been very good to me. Hugh, we shall know what makes the stars shine now." "I took him from her in a reckless mood, and didn't think what harm would come of it," said Hugh, laying his hand upon his head and speaking in a lower voice. "I ask her pardon and his. Look here," he added roughly in his former tone. "You see this lad?" They murmured yes, and seemed to wonder why he asked. "That gentleman yonder," pointing to the clergyman, "has often in the last few days spoken to me of faith and strong belief. You see what I am, more brute than man, as I have been often told. But I had faith enough to believe, and did believe as strongly as any of you gentlemen can believe anything, that this one life would be spared. See what he is. Look at him." Barnaby had moved towards the door and stood beckoning him to follow. "If this was not faith and strong belief," cried Hugh, raising his right arm aloft and looking upward like a savage prophet whom the near approach of death had filled with inspiration, "where are they? What else should teach me, born as I was born and reared as I have been reared, to hope for any mercy in this hardened, cruel, unrelenting place? Upon these human shambles, I, who never raised this hand in prayer till now, call down the wrath of God. On that black tree of which I am the ripened fruit, I do invoke the curse of all its victims, past and present and to come. On the head of that man who, in his conscience, owns me for his son, I leave the wish that he may never